Good evening. I am Michael Eric Owens. I am the Director of Special Projects and Programs at the Oklahoma Conference of Churches. And we're so excited tonight to have this discussion. It is Black History Month. We are at we would say the 12th hour almost of Black History Month, but we wanted to come on because something that we don't always address in the Black community, the Black church, is trauma. And we have two distinguished guests here tonight. First of all, I'll introduce Pastor Juan Price. Pastor Price is the pastor of Powerhouse Church here in Oklahoma City. He is a very busy man. He runs his own school. He also sits on the Ralph Ellison Foundation board as one of the executive leaders. And he just does amazing things throughout the community. We have known each other for quite some time. So, Pastor Price, I appreciate you spending some time with us here tonight. And then we have Pastor Brian Cash, whom I have just met, but he is actually in Ohio, and he's joining us tonight. He is the senior pastor of East Mount Zion Baptist Church. He's a scholar. Let me just toss that out there right for you. And he does great things within the community. He's a mentor, he's a leader, and his career speaks of good works. And so we are thankful to have Pastor Cash here with us tonight. So what I want to do is just dive right in. And this conversation, for those who are listening, this conversation actually is very overdue. But the emphasis is on the outward trauma that most of the world has seen in the untimely death of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and so many others in the Black community. And we know that Black people have, within the community, have dealt with trauma for a very long time. So I just want to start off with you, Pastor Cash. If you could just talk a little bit about, because you see it each and every day, talk about, as a faith leader, how do we deal with trauma? Let's just talk about in our lives, not necessarily in the church, but how do we deal with trauma in our lives?
Thank you, Dr. Owens, and I'm appreciative of the invitation that you all have extended to me to share. And trauma is something, and you talk about how do we deal with it. The problem is that we don't deal with it, right? There are so many unspoken traumas that happens, especially in the Black church, and I believe that that's the conversation that we'll have tonight. I pastor a Black church. I was raised in the Black church. I served for three or 4 years in Fort Lauderdale as a children and youth family pastor. I served in Nashville for about 6 years as a college pastor. And so you see unspoken trauma on all levels, from unspoken trauma around mental health. No one really wants to deal with many of the areas that are happening in the spaces of our church, trauma that our youth are dealing with. I experienced and saw so much trauma in terms of our children in the spaces of church, in the moments of I don't feel like as though I belong in this space, and so there's a trauma in that sense, where in which they don't return to spaces because those spaces represent trauma. How you dealt with my mom, who was a single parent, how you dealt with my family, who was not on the kind of level as others experience. It's kind of like Du Bois writes in his book, one of his pieces around the Black church and his critique on the Black church. He talks about how he was with some friends and they were dancing and they were having some fun and, experiencing what it is in terms of the tradition of Black church, in terms of sacred music, but being scolded by one of the leaders there. And he never got over that, right? And so many of our youth today will not never return back to church. It is what a gentleman in the book "You Lost Me" calls nomads, the or exiles or prodigals. Right, these individuals either wander away, they just leave, or they become a prodigal. Right, and these are unspoken, undealt with traumas. And so it is interesting as you ask the question, how do we deal with it? One of the first things is that we have to really start having conversations about it, because we don't deal with it, we don't talk about it, we don't acknowledge it until it's too late, and then most of our organizations shut down.
Well said. I mean, you sparked something in my mind. I want to come back. I want Pastor Price to weigh in on this, but I want to come back because you brought up the stigma. So I want to come back and address the stigma after Pastor Price.
Yes, and again, thank you, uh, Mr. Owens and Pastor Cash. Thank you for sharing what you just shared, because you really just out the gate. You open up the floodgate. So and what you said about we don't deal with it, and the question was how to deal with trauma in my own life, and I would say, and we'll get into this a little as we proceed, but it probably wasn't until 20, 25 years ago that I began to realize how much I was affected by certain things that happened as a young person. I have been in church literally all of my life. My mother dedicated me to the Lord when I was in her womb. So as soon as she could take me to church, I was showing up at church. And but there are certain things that have happened and continue to happen in the church that bring about trauma. And so when you ask the question, how do I deal with, or how have I dealt with trauma? I am just really, so the past 25 years, coming into the knowledge that, listen, there are some things that went on that affected me, that did something to me internally. And the problem with that, when you deal with trauma and don't know, because you have no basis of how to deal with it, because we haven't talked about it, there's no track that we've seen that we can travel down. And so what happens, you begin to shut down. Either you shut down or you take flight. And so as Pastor Cash was saying, many people have left the church. They're the prodigals. Those who don't leave the church carry some baggage. They shut down. And the problem with that is think about Jericho. It talked about Jericho being this walled city, and no one came in. That's one reason why we set up those walls. But the problem is, it says no one came in and no one went out. And so we find ourselves, if we don't deal with this properly, then we are this walled city. And so the real us hardly ever shows up. So Michael, answer the question. I had to 25 years ago realize that I had been damaged by some things, and just like peeling an onion, I had to do the layers, layer by layer. Painful, caused some tears, but I had to do it.
I mean, it's interesting because I, like you, I'm still trying to deal with this trauma, right? I'm just gonna be honest. Not just you know, childhood trauma, but adult trauma. I'm still trying to make sense of it and figuring out how to cope when each and every day we're faced with trauma. Okay. I mean, I think about Dante Wright. I think about the fact that she got 2 years. All the time, all as these stories resurface, we revisit our trauma. And so, but what prevents us from having this conversation? What is the stigma? If we could talk about that for a minute, what is the stigma, Pastor Cash, in preventing us? What are the things that are said? What are the barriers that prevent us from addressing trauma?
That's a great question. I think from my perspective as a black man in America, one of the barriers speaks to the stigma of always being strong, right? Always not really truly bearing one's emotional feelings before people and appearing weak. And transparency causes you to break down those walls, as Pastor Price mentioned. I'm a grandson of one of the strongest black men that I know, right? And son of a strong black man. And as a kid, as a young boy, I rarely saw my grandfather cry. So I saw my grandfather lose his mother and his sister within within a year, really. And the two individuals were so close to him. And at the funeral of his sister, whom he really, really loved, he bit his thumb so he wouldn't cry as they closed the casket. And not a year later, he came down with depression and was in depression for 10 years. But these are things that we don't deal with. And sometimes we don't know to deal with them. What does it mean now that I'm newly married 2 years now, almost 2 years now? Going through counseling with my wife, and that's another stigma. Black men or black people don't go to counseling, right? So it's kind of hard to pick out trauma when we don't realize it is trauma. We create walls and we build around them to toughen ourselves. And so these are just, we call it life, right? Church says that, we go through momentary issues. Life is filled with trouble, right? Man born of a woman is of a few days, and those days are full of trouble, right? In this life, you will have tribulation, right? All of these sayings that we create to help us to deal with those things that we don't want to deal with or can't deal with on our own, right? And that's why one would argue that religion is the opioid for the masses, right? Because we don't want to deal with it. We don't have the tools to deal with it. So we don't, right? And we're impacted by 400 years of slavery and all of these things that we don't want to talk about. America doesn't want to talk about. Systems don't want to talk about. And we don't have the tools to deal with. We weren't given tools to deal with. I mean, you think about, and I think about my great grandparents, who were the children and grandchildren of slaves, right? And left the South, left the plantation field, moved to sharecropping. Never had time to deal with trauma, right? And so your kids grow up in that space, and it passed down generation to generation. And I think about my dad. My dad didn't have the tools to deal with this trauma. So what did he do? He worked himself to death, right? And he told us, work. You ain't got time to deal with emotion, right? And so I didn't know how to deal with these things until I sat before a counselor. And my first counseling session ever, I did more crying than I did talking, right? Bawling out, and I'm just sharing. And the counselor wasn't even that good of a counselor. Now that I've had other counselors, right? And I'm just sitting there bawling out, and I'm with my wife in counseling, and I'm recognizing, I'm like, that's why I do that, right? I don't know why I get mad at you for this, or I don't know why I act like this towards you, and not realizing it's trauma. It's trauma based upon how I saw my mom being treated. It's trauma based upon I saw how my dad interacted with us, or my dad did not interact with us because he didn't have the lessons and the tools to do that, right? So I wanted my father to do something better or something else with us as kids, and he was looking at us like I did more than my dad did, right? These are traumas that we don't acknowledge, and so stigmas are, we need to be strong. Stigmas are, from Christianity and from our religion, God is in control of everything. And even though you're suffering from, and we don't realize mental health is more than somebody just being, we call them crazy. All of us got mental health issues, right? And there's a stigma that says you need to be okay. And I love now people have t-shirts that say it's okay not to be okay, right? And I can embrace that, and I can live in that tension. But until we break down those walls, those Jericho walls, as Pastor Price says, we'll never be able to deal with trauma.
Pastor Price.
Wow. Yes. Those stigmas. Big boys don't cry. Here's the thing. There's been so much silence because we are told Black folk don't have problems. It's the white folk who got these issues. And so, but if you ever do some research, like for family reunions, man, you find out that, no, we got some issues. We have some issues. You be like, okay, well, why is she listed in here in the family tree? Right? Oh, some stuff went on that nobody talked about. And so, but we as a people, we want to say that we don't have these issues, and it's other folk, other cultures, other people who have the issues. And then, as Pastor Cash talked about getting counseling, we say, listen, we are spiritual people. You don't go get any counseling. We're going to pray about it. We're going to pray about it and trust God. And so all of those misconceptions, even that of we misunderstood, we had a misunderstanding that what we thought were the rules, that, the rules that they're playing by, they don't align themselves with the word of God. But we didn't know that. And so we started emulating what was before us. And now we find ourselves in this ditch, and we are traumatized, and we don't know where to look. And so, like Pastor Brian, what you said, you get angry at everybody else because it's always somebody else's fault, because we have not been taught to be responsible for our own journey out in there.
It's interesting, the things that both of you have pointed out when we talk about stigma, and I think it takes leadership that is transparent, that is vulnerable, that is honest. And I think a lot of times, and I appreciate your honesty here tonight, because we cannot have this conversation without being direct. And I think Black leadership has oftentimes used certain passages to paralyze the congregants. And I can't go talk to pastor if pastor's telling me that I'm just going through a season, joy cometh in the morning, right? So the pastor's telling me, like, be strong, do the work. And, as David said to Solomon, he'll never forsake you or leave you. Be strong, do the work. So when you're telling me this, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to look and say, what's wrong with me? Right? Why am I feeling this way? Why am I going through? Why can't handle it? Why can't I just get over this thing? And I think it it puts us in our own silos. And so how have you modeled um, this sort of approach to talking about trauma, and how have you dealt with people that have come to you as a pastor in trauma? Pastor Cash.
Oh, great. Yeah, absolutely. Recently, I become pastor of this church, 2020 of February. And, in the middle of really right a month before the pandemic started. Right. And so, you're having to I'm dealing mentally, just getting married, coming to a church where the advice every older person gives you is, when you get there, love on the people, just preach, don't change anything, just be there, right? But how do you love on people you can't see, right? And I'm meeting people at graveyard services, right, for the first time. And I mean, just a season of great depression, trying to learn another person to become one with during a season of just craziness. So me mentally, I had to figure out ways to deal with my mental health, deal with all of those trauma pieces. And so counseling and going to see a professional was of utmost importance. And so not only for me, but everyone that I talked to, and even in our congregation, 1 month, we had an entire month around mental health, right? And encouraging our congregants to go see counselors. One of my associate ministers preached an amazing sermon just on mental health, right? And he talked about, from a transparent place, dealing with depression and dealing with thoughts of suicide and dealing with that trauma, right? And going to see a professional to assist. When I do counseling, all the time, I talk to them about, yes, this is, a biblical, spiritual counseling session, but there is a limitation to what I can give. And I want to make sure throughout this conversation, at the end of this conversation, I either ask them, are you seeing or seeking professional help? If you are not seeing or seeking professional help, here are some suggestions, or here are some people that you can engage with, right? Marriage counseling at the same time, right? I can give you what the word says, and I can give you from my perspective, but I advise you to go see a professional. Right. And we don't do much of that because we talked about the stigmas already. We think that we don't need those things. Right. We got the word and that's it. But I've been really intentional about being transparent about my own experiences, being transparent about what even my wife and I are walking through in terms of mental health, in terms of going and seeing professionals, but also encouraging others to do the same thing.
When you were talking, Pastor, and just a second, Pastor, I was thinking, what someone would say: the Lord is your counselor. Right? We've heard that before, right, Pastor Price?
Yeah. And so that someone won't get upset with us, we're not saying that the Lord is not a counselor. We're not saying that. We're not saying he is the healer. But what we're saying is that he works out his purposes through many methods. And all healing comes from the Lord. So we're going to channel the credit back to him, but we also want to utilize those folk that God has gifted. That's what we're saying. We utilize those folk whom God has gifted to help people. And so we're not trying to say, well, God can't do anything. We're saying allow God to do it through other vessels, other people, other methods. So that being said, I do have a couple of friends that have certain areas of expertise, so I can connect people with them if the need arises. But as I'm listening, even tonight, I'm challenged even more that to take even a deeper dive into this, where the mental health is concerned, because having my academy, my school, I realized that so many, probably 9 out of 10 of the young people who come have some kind of mental health challenge. Oh, it's not that pronounced, but it's there. So we have to really sort of think differently, even as leaders. We have to, like you said, Pastor Cash, be a little bit even more transparent, and get folk to look at things from an honest perspective, and rather than put it under the rug of the God would take care of it. God would handle it. Yes, but what is our responsibility in that?
And I think about the Black church, and I think about the role that the Black church has played throughout history, whether we're talking about slavery, convict leasing, Jim Crow, Black codes. The Black church has always been a safe haven for us to come back to. But I think in some cases, the Black church has also been very detrimental when we've ran for refuge. We've been sent back out into a world, as Pastor Cash has pointed out, not equipped with the tools necessary. If is this conversation happening among other Black pastors? And if so, what are those conversations like? Pastor Cash?
You know what? I revert back to my answer to the question when we first started. And you mentioned, how do we deal with trauma? And I said that we don't deal with it enough, right? And it's the same thing with this question that you asked. How are the questions, or how are the conversations between Black pastors around this? In my settings, in the settings here in Cleveland, they either don't happen or they don't happen enough, right? And I think that a huge reason why they don't happen enough is because we do not have the language or the tools to talk about them. And then number two, we're not transparent and honest and authentic with ourselves, and we sure won't be authentic with each other about what really truly is going on, right? Because we know from statistics that pastors deal with suicide thoughts, mental health issues on a greater level now than ever before. But we don't talk about these things. When we get together, we, use old kind of preacher language. Doc, how was your church? Or how many people were there? Or this and that. But we don't really talk about, how we are feeling. One of the things that I do with my ministers now, I am more intentional about talking about your spiritual health, right? Your mental health. How is your devotional life, right? Talking about what books are you reading, or what things are you doing to lift up your physical and your spiritual self. I'm not concerned about what sermons you want to write or any of that, or I'm not even concerned in talking about what the other pastors of what ministry initiatives that they're creating. I'm asking, how are you doing, right? One of the last things we do when we're talking to each other is ask each other how we really are doing, right? Mentally, spiritually. How are you doing spiritually? Right? We're not concerned about those things. And I think that the more we become concerned about the total being of each other, the more these conversations can start happening, because we are more focused externally or from a strategic standpoint of being successful. But we don't realize that in the search for success, we lose self, and we're not focused on self. And so it's kind of hard to have conversations around self or the empowerment of other selves, from a spiritual and ontological sense, because these are not a priority of ours.
Pastor Price?
sick doctors don't do very well trying to help sick people. And so we have to start, as a passage of scripture says, give heed to yourself and your ministry. And so there's this imbalance, just worried about doing ministry, when the first thing in that order was take care of yourself, give heed to yourself. So and I have a few pastors we can actually talk on a real level, but as you said, Pastor Cash, mostly when pastors come together, it's the superficial level, talking about how many comes to Sunday school, how many members you're running, what kind of car you're driving, and we don't talk about the reality of sometimes after we have preached our best message, we go home and fall into depression because unfortunately we got caught up in that performance trap. And so we are trying to figure out, did I do everything right today? Did I dot every I, cross every T? And then we can allow one person to not speak to us. And then all kind of stuff rises up in us, because the truth of the matter is, many of us as Black people in the Black church are dealing with rejection. That's a great thing that we're dealing with. We felt like either the what was said by a pastor or an elder in the church wounded me, and we haven't dealt with that. But I think let me get back to your question, Brother Mike. I think that we have to kind of push the envelope. Pastor, again, you said, Pastor Cash, how are you doing? That's one. A few years ago, I was having breakfast at my church for pastors, about 5 or 6 pastors. And I said, okay, when you come, there are 2 rules. One, you cannot preach. We are not coming together to preach. And 2, don't come talking about your church announcements. We are coming together because we are hurting, and we need to find a way that we can come together and talk about this so that we can be the healed physician to help our parishioners.
It sounds to me like, just listening to both of you, that we're not doing enough when it comes to mental health, trauma awareness. I'm wondering, should the approach change? Should ministry change? Should preaching change? And the reason why I just and let this be the backdrop to how you answer this, because we've been a bruised people since the outset. We've been a traumatized people since the outset. So trauma is nothing new to Black folks, and especially Black folks in the church. So should we because it's not working, right? It's not alleviating. It's not healing our approach right now. So should ministry change? Should preaching change? Should this be a priority? Because I would like to say a person that is always in trauma cannot live a successful life of any source of we would say quality or productivity, because you're always battling something. Pastor Cash?
Absolutely. The issue is that, and I've learned this being in the traditional black church, is that there are churches that do ministry just to do ministry, and then there are churches that do ministry to really touch the needs of the soul, right? To touch the needs of the mind, body, and soul, that total being, right? When Jesus sees or heals anyone, what does he always say? Do you want to be made whole, right? Wholeness ministry. And I think we have gotten so fixated on just doing just to do. This is why we do the same thing for 40 years, having the same type of Sunday school classes, the same type of children's ministry, the same type of everything, because we get it. We're courses of habit, right? And we just do just to do, not realizing that we're supposed to be serving those who are in need. And our problem is that we don't know what people really need, right? We still base things based upon what we've done 30, 40 years ago, and those things were created because of a need that we know not of, right? And so are still our traditions that we have address needs that were prevalent 40 years ago, instead of saying, okay, what do we need to do now? And until we actually evaluate the needs of the current spaces and how do we best serve people, ministry will not be in the place that creates total transformation.
Go ahead, Pastor.
That's well said. I like what Pastor Cash just shared. You know, we should think about our proclamation of the gospel, but it should be a message of hope. It should be a message of healing, and not spending time on how well do I entertain, but my proclamation, my message should be that of hope and healing and reconciliation. And then we want to help people to grow, help them to become more like Christ. But we have to, so yes, we have to change some of our way we do ministry. Really put that inner person at forefront. Okay, I had a mentor who said to me, religion that starts in the feet stays in the feet, but religion that starts in the head will eventually make its way down to the feet, and then folk will know what they're shouting about. So what he's saying is that, listen, we got to change our approach and teach people and deal with their soul, their mind, their intellect, their will, and then rather than preaching to stir them up. Yeah, because people get stirred up and then they still go home not knowing how to deal with the trauma, still carrying a stigma from 20 years ago, 30 years ago. So yes, Michael, we have to, as the GPS woman says, recalculate.
You know, I completely agree with you. I mean, it's to continue to do what we do and to receive the continual results that we do in the Black community is madness. We know that there's trauma. Well, everybody deals with trauma, whether you're Black or white or Latinx, doesn't matter. You know, trauma is a human condition. However, there's some trauma that is unique to Black people. And that trauma is reinforced societally, simply by what we see, right? I mean, more than likely, we're not seeing uh, Black people being paraded as heroes, um, sheroes, and so forth on TV. They're getting shot. There's an encounter. So it's the continual trauma. What do you say to young people that you sense that they're going through some challenges they can't articulate? What would you say to the young person that is listening right now that is dealing with trauma in their life, but they can't articulate it? What would you say to them, Pastor Cash?
Absolutely. So one of the things is that you don't have to articulate it. You can exist in that tension and find spaces to engage others who can be supportive. And you don't have to have the language, right? You just need a community. You need a group of people that you can engage with. And you don't have to be able to say the right things. You can just say how it comes out. I think one of the things is that we are huge on politics and respectability, right? And I need to say it this way, or I need to be this way. No, sometimes we just need to let people be people, right? And that's one of our major issues in the church and community, is that we want people to remain in boxes, and we want people to remain in this kind of situation, or be, respectable in this area. But it's okay to just say, I'm tired, I'm exhausted, right? I can't do. One of the things that someone told me, someone told them, they said it's okay to say I don't have the capacity, right? I don't have the ability to do, right? And I do not have to perform like I have the ability to do, or I can, and I can do it, but I also can say I can't do it, right? And I can be honest. And one of the things we are not comfortable with is being honest with ourselves, but also cultivating community with people that we can be honest with. We talk about traumas that all of us exist and deal with, especially when you are African American in a predominantly white institution or white community. You have become on focus, right? I got to be always on. I mean, we were taught that when you get into those spaces, you have to be the best, right? You have to talk the best. I remember I went to Vanderbilt University for grad school, and it's 80 students in the divinity school in our class, and in our incoming class, and it's about maybe 12 Black students, right? And so the Black students at the beginning of the semester had a conversation with each other, right? We had a powwow. Look, when you go into the class, you make sure you have read the material. If you have not read the material, do not open your mouth, right? When you get in class, you need to have knowledge about what you're talking about. We need to be the cream of the crop. We are here because they think that we're charity cases. So, I mean, this is in your mind, right? You have to be the best at everything. And when you get into these spaces, you don't want to acknowledge that I have weaknesses, or I am tired, or I can't do this, right? And the moment you acknowledge I can't, the moment you come to that space where you're comfortable being honest with yourself, is the moment you experience freedom.
Well said. Well said, Pastor.
If there's a young person listening to this, I would say to you two simple things. One, just say, I need help. Be honest and say to someone, listen, don't be fooled by this exterior. Because we're good young people. I know it's hard to believe, but I was there once. and we're good at having this tough exterior. this is what was said about me. They said, "Oh, you were just unemotional. You are unemotional." But I had some emotions, but they were sealed off. So I'll say to you, young person, allow someone the freedom to get into your space. Allow someone that freedom. So listen, uh, don't be fooled by this exterior. I really have not figured life out yet. I'm hurting, and I realize I need some help. Because you don't want to go another 20, 30 years before you get some help, because along the way, there are going to be some relationships that are going to be either damaged or hindered or at best kept at a distance. And so, but you don't want to do that. So I would say to the young person, cry out, call out, and just be honest.
No, that is great advice. I know. I never, and I mean, Pastor Cash, you talked about this earlier. I mean, growing up, I didn't know I was dealing with trauma. You spoke about that, and it wasn't until later in life, until, and I'll be honest, frankly, George Floyd, when that happened to him, something happened to me. I'm still trying to figure out what exactly broke me so deeply, but it reminded me so much of my experiences in the Black community, my experiences being in white spaces, being only the Black person there. It made me think about um, how difficult those experiences can be, and and I like the fact that we have to be able to say no. I don't have the capacity, because what I found in my own life, trauma is self-defeating. It will sap every ounce of energy out of you. It will snap your creativity, your ingenuity. It will take all of that because you're trying to deal with this issue, right? And I'm just thinking, because you did bring up these white spaces that we find ourselves in. How do we break ourselves of that cycle? Because we also imprison ourselves. If I walk into a white space that says I have to, I got to be the best, I got to speak the best, I have to have the, I have to present, because oftentimes we feel like we're representing the Black community, right? And how much pressure is that on an individual? So they're not telling us, they're not saying you represent the Black community, but that's been put in our head. And but I would also say Black people are the only people that are asked, what does the Black community think about this? Okay, so you're never ask a white person that. And so how do we break ourselves of those traditional things that we have placed on us as we move forward? Because that's part of, I think, the liberation from trauma is seeing yourself as a value individual, not as someone that needs to always prove something. um, Pastor Cash, could you talk about that?
Yeah, that's so big. Our church is going through a reading that I think every person should read. Richard Foster's book, Celebration of Discipline, and in that piece, he deals with what he calls the inward disciplines, the outward disciplines, and the corporate disciplines. And we're in the outward disciplines, and he deals with something called the discipline of simplicity, the discipline of simplicity and the discipline of submission. And in both of those disciplines, you recognize that life is not as serious as we like to make it, right? And that the power of God gives us freedom to be able to recognize that we don't have to take everything so serious. that there are things that try to put pressure on us. There are people that try to put pressure on us. We try to put expectations on ourselves that God never gave us, right? God gives us everything that we need to be able to be effective in the world. What we end up doing is adding things that God never added, right, for us. And so when we can learn the discipline of simplicity, it is something that those monastic groups of folks learned when they went out into the desert, right? The desert fathers. I love reading those stories. The little extreme, they are a little extreme for me. I couldn't end up doing those things, but I mean, to be able to come to the space that I can give it all up, right? And I don't need these things, right? But we become dependent upon praise. We become dependent upon the need to be praised, the need to be successful, the need to prove people wrong, right? I think from transparent perspective, all of my academic kind of matriculation was driven by proving people wrong, right? Proving people that I could do this, proving to others that what you thought of me was not true, proving to my eighth grade teacher what you said to the boys in the class when you sent all the girls out, that the only place for us to be was in jail or the graveyard. I had to prove you wrong. But when you can come to that freedom of simplicity, the freedom of submission, that I don't, right? Life still goes on without me being successful to the point that I think I need to be successful. I still am going to wake up in the morning. I'm still breathing. I still have my family. I still love my wife. I still, I still love my dog. I mean, just finding the simple things in life is it's not easy, but that's why it's called a discipline. And so being able to find that freedom in your spiritual walk and your spiritual devotion is the most freeing thing you can ever experience.
James said that he asked the question, what does the fighting and the war come? He says, it's really a war going on within your members, within. And so, as you said, Pastor Cash, it's really getting that compass and really getting that vertical relationship so tight. I know what God has given me. I know how He has gifted me, and whether these people, white or black, celebrate me or not, my vertical relationship is so tight that I'm free now. Because we all, as African American males, the three of us and many others, we have been in that performance trap. It's trying to perform, and what makes it really challenging, Michael, is that we're in the white space and you feel like, okay, I got to perform, got to be my best. But then while you're there, then there's someone in the black community not understanding why you are there. And so you get criticized. Look at him, he's over there with those white folk. Just, trying to get with those white folk. And so we're in this tight place. But once that's personal, once I really got it settled within myself, that I only have an audience of one to please. That freed me up. And so when people ask me the question, I go to the places, why do blacks do such and such? Well, I ask questions back. Well, why are you not doing it? If you can explain to me why you're not doing it, then we can explain why we're doing it. So I hope that helped a little bit, but mainly it's just being free within, because I know what God has given me.
As we close, this has been such a great conversation, and I think one that needs such a wide lens to see generational trauma, outside trauma, family trauma. I mean, it's Cornell West describes the Black community as a bruised people. And we truly are. We are a bruised people. The problem is a lot of us don't know how to go to the doctor. We don't know how to seek help. So in closing here, if you could talk about what would you say to the Black church? You have we're gonna paint, we're gonna set it up. You're at the lectern, and we have assembled. I know it sounds impossible, but we have assembled just about every Black pastor leader in the world is in the audience. It's the who's who of the Black leadership. And you have been given the opportunity to say to them something about trauma in the Black church. What would you say to them? They're going to leave with this message. You can give them a charge. You can what would you say to them if you had their undivided attention? Pastor Cash.
Absolutely. The prophet asked the question, is there a balm in Gilead, right? You know, is there a physician that can bring wholeness and healing? Is there some type of sage that could be offered to the people? And the answer is yes. The Black church has that healing, right? The Black church has always been the safe haven, has always been healing and the very resource, life resource that Black people need and needed. I think the issue that the Black church and the challenge the Black church need to address now is that the people who need that healing are very diverse, right? The people that need that healing are people that have been hurt by, we call them wounded healers. And we have to be really intentional in how we share that healing to our people. We have to be more open to who our people are and what and really we have to broaden what we identify as holy, right, and what we identify as sacred, because just as your married couple and that has the nice house and nice family, you identify them as sacred. The broken are sacred. In everyone is sacred, right? Those who we identify as the outcast, the marginalized. We have pushed away our homosexual brothers and sisters, right? Those individuals who we say don't have a place in this church, but they have a place in the choir. We have pushed away our people who suffer from mental health issues, right? That we don't know how to deal with or handle, but we do. We have that. We've been dealing with it for a long time, but we have to be honest about that. And we have the healing, but we have to be more intentional in being open to who we provide that healing to. And so the moment we realize that, the moment we get that, the moment we can be more impactful, and we will not be a museum, but we can be a movement again. And so I encourage our Black church to be more open and see through our folks and see them for who they are and see their needs and count their needs as holy and use what God has given you, the capacity He's given you to do that work.
Oh, wow. I would say let's create safe spaces for people to dialogue. You know, give them a safe space to dialogue without criticism. Promote transparency coupled with forgiveness and acceptance. You know, we too often we have damaged folk from the pulpit with our dogmatic preaching. So let's promote transparency coupled with forgiveness and acceptance. Build relationships within the congregation, with other leaders. And let's express our challenges and offer help and healing through our faith. And there's a scripture I want to end with. It says, salt is good, but if the salt loses its flavor, how will you season it? Have salt in yourselves. So we got to be salt.
I want to thank you both for sharing your wisdom, for being transparent, for being an example of what honesty can truly bring, and that's healing. And the Oklahoma Conference of Churches, we thank you on behalf of our executive director, Dr. Shannon Fleck. We appreciate you being here with us. And this program will be available as well. And I would encourage you to send it around, because I agree with both pastors here that we need to continue this dialogue about trauma in the Black community and the Black church. Thank you so much. That concludes our program, and good night.
Thank you.